Hey, Alec Miller here, founder of Rose and Rogues, and today I'm talking to Leonardo of Blauw Films. Leonardo's a director and founder of Blauw Films, and he's working on a number of digital short films, as are we at Royals and Rogues. And I view this as us kind of throwing our hat in the ring, stating that there's going to be a digital filmmaking underground, and perhaps even renaissance/revolution. In today's video, we talk about the advantages of being light and nimble, as well as why we think that this trend is happening, even getting into what an open source IP might look like and what the advantages are over the studio system and not being overly protective of your IP. If any of these topics sound interesting to you, I highly recommend you just watch all the way through. It's a great discussion and I think you're going to enjoy it thoroughly. The other thing I would ask is please share this video if you know anyone that would be interested in short filmmaking or digital art, because I think it's really encouraging to hear that there's a potential for your work to be made without having to get bought by Hollywood or get picked up by a large studio or publisher. That now is the right time to pick up your pencil, pick up your Wacom pad, open up Blender, and to get to work, because you're going to start to see digital filmmaking and digital art taking over. So please share this video with digital artists you know, and without further ado, here's my interview with Leonardo of Blauw Films.
You're shooting everything on just a DSLR or like a camera?
Yeah, I have a DSLR hooked up, and so I have a whole bunch of cameras here, as you can see. I have a collection of lenses and camera stuff.
Oh, beautiful.
So yeah, there's some fun stuff here. There's like a cool, I have an old Minolta film camera that I still use now and then when I want to take it out. And then I have some other random stuff. The first ever, I was an early adopter of the Sony mirrorless. And I got the first gen alpha. This is a 5, and I was telling everyone, I was like, this thing's gonna change filmmaking, because I was in film school at the time, and I was like, this is the future. Like, screw your DSLR, screw your big old like video camera with like your zoom lens. Like, this is where it's at. I can adapt any lens. And at the time, my favorite lens to adapt was this guy. And so what I had is my setup almost all the time for years and years and years was this, and I loved it. So it's an old Minolta all metal lens, 1.4 f-stop. It's gorgeous, the giant.
That looks
piece
beautiful.
Of glass. And it's tiny, right? And this shot 1080p, which at the time was a big deal. It's all the Canon shot. They didn't shoot 4K. And
is that Minolta a fixed 50 or something?
Yeah, it's just a 55.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah. Or it might be weird. It's a 58. Yeah, it's a 58. So it's kind of a weird. And on a crop sensor, it's more like a 70. But but I loved it for portraits and stuff. And I shot everything on this bad boy. And I shot manual only because I'd adapt stuff. And then I learned how to focus. And I shot like sports manually. And people were like, "You're a madman." And I'm like, "No, that's just how I roll." Like I just lock the focus on like the rim of the, wherever the action was going to happen, and then wait. And I do a lot of street photography. See. But this thing, I was telling people this is going to change everything, and people were all about the Canon 5D Mark II or Mark I at the time, and everyone's like, "Oh, the 5D," and I was like, "No." But then people were like taking the mirror out, because in film, if you're shooting film, like you didn't need the mirror, you didn't want the mirror, and then they were going direct light. I was like, "This is that, guys," and so then I made the mistake of telling everyone how great it was, and I'm not taking credit for this. Everyone just recognized it was a good camera, and from there, Sony's taken over the world, as far as digital filmmaking goes. It's funny because I've always been like that, and this will lead us really nicely into our conversation. And I feel that way right now about short films. I feel like I'm looking at digital short filmmaking and going like, guys, this is it. This is the new thing that we're all going to want to be on the wave of. And I've been really bad in the past about not publicly doing this. There's so many things I was early on that if I would have just freaking stayed with it. So in 2011, no, not even, no, 2004, 5, 6, 7. So 2000, early thousands, I was making lightsaber videos. I was drawing frame by frame the lightsaber onto the stick in a program called LS Maker. It was called Lightsaber Maker. It was this piece of junk program. Actually, no, it was awesome for the time, and those guys are cool for making it. It sparked my interest in film, and so I was making these lightsabers by hand. And we were uploading. We made our own. A friend of mine made his own URL. He's now a great web developer. I use him. He's made our site and other people's sites. But we made our own website and uploaded them to there. And we got like a few views just randomly. And then we just made like random videos. And YouTube came about. And like we kind of had one or two on there. But we're like, whatever. I totally forgot about it. And then I realized like if I just would have stuck at that, I would have been like Freddie Wong. Like I would have been Corridor Digital at this point if I just stuck at that one thing. And then a few years later in like 2008, 2009, I made a tutorial for like Avid Video Editor, right? And it was just like at my school, I was an IT guy at my school. And so everyone would come to me for all their like editing programs. You know, how do I export a QuickTime? How do I make it 4:3? How do I make it 16:9? And so I just made like a quick how to export an Avid. And that video got like 42,000 views. And I actually got like a check from Google one day randomly because it's back when they just like opted you in to the payment program. Like, and you just got, you just had an account, a YouTube account, and they'd send you money. And so, and I think I just had an AdSense account for no reason, like just to run the channel or something. And I got sent this check for like a couple $100, and I was like, I never cashed it even, which is dumb. But I was just like, that's cool. Like, wonder what that's for. And I looked over and I was like, that channel I haven't looked at. I was like, so if I just kept making tutorials, I'd be like one of these giant tutorial channels now. And I didn't keep doing that. So like now I see the short film wave and I'm like, I'm not effing it up this time. Like I'm going to be talking about the short film world. I'm going to be making short film content, and I'm going to be making my own short films. And so you are kind of seeing that same pattern when it comes to short films. And at Blauw Films, you guys are working on multiple all at once, which I think is very bold. We have like multiple ideas, but only one in actual production. So I guess for starting out, like what got you into short films and why now? Because like I kind of gave my story, right? It's like patterns I'm recognizing, and I think this is a good idea. And this time I don't want to pass me by. But what is your rationale? How'd you get here?
In a way, it's very similar.
Okay.
So when I started out, when I was very, very young, I was just making short films because it's easier to make it short than to make it long.
Right.
From there, I got an interest into visual effects, similar to you making lightsabers.
Yep.
Going through everything from Video Copilot to YouTube, all gurus on YouTube.
Right.
From there, it was basically, I like the short form format. And I felt like the industry had certain predisposed conceptions of what a short film should be. Mm-hmm. I would always hear people tell me, make a short film because it's a calling card.
Yep.
I was like, okay, but calling card for what? What if I just want to make the short film?
Yep.
And then that kind of got me always in a bit of a conflict. I was always trying to justify myself why I was making a short film instead of just doing it.
Well, they would say, like, you make a short film so you can go to the festival circuit and win a bunch of awards at festivals. Excuse me. And then that gets you noticed. And then from there, you'll get your first small feature.
Yes.
You'll get your first indie feature. And it was always the goal, was to use the short film for some other means than, like you were saying, that the ends were never to make a short film. You was to make a short film for what? And so if you told someone, like you said, like, hey, I'm working on a short film, they're like, oh, what for? What are you trying to get? What film are you trying to get into a festival? Where are you trying to show it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the classic conversation you get with pretty much everyone in the film industry. And weirdly enough, that mindset even sprawls into the other markets, from games, if you're speaking to game developers or anyone. What I found interesting is, coming from the Netherlands, I feel like I've gone a lot to small indie art exhibits with video art. And these video artists came from all over the world, but for some reason I was just surrounded by a lot of video art. That was short form content for the sake of being short form content.
Right.
So something in me told me it was possible to just do it for the sake of making it.
Right.
I do always want to make features in the future, but I do definitely see them as separate things. There are short film ideas that I want to tackle as short films, and there are feature ideas that I haven't had the time yet to do, but I'll keep working on it until the time is right.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. Currently, my producer and I have been talking about this, and he's sort of a business partner as well. He's becoming more and more a part of Royals and Rogues, and I can't decide if I ever want to make a feature film. Frankly, like myself, I love shorts, and I love the freedom a short film gives you because you don't have to have all the answers. When it comes to short films, like you said, we have the stigma of that can exist, and then as their own, and they don't make money and all this other stuff. But then I think you've started to see shorter than short films, digital content making money and being an end to itself, right? Even if it doesn't make money, at least it exists on its own merit. And that would be like digital art, and you're seeing this with NFTs. So you see things that are shorter than short films, making buku bucks, right? Like, I don't need to give examples of people and whoever. And then you have feature films, which are kind of both bigger than they've ever been, but also not really making as much money as they could, right? Like it's just, everything in life is very weird. We were living through a bifurcation right now. And so it makes everything very, very uncomfortable because we have like the largest government you've ever seen in the history of the world, but also the largest corporations you've ever seen in the history of the world. And normally you'd expect one or the other, right? Like a free market with a bunch of companies, but very small government, or like a big government, but like not a lot of flourishing companies. Instead, we have both. And so there's this weird bifurcation. And it's like we have more millionaires than we've ever had in the history of the world. But we also have more, a larger gap between the millionaires and the people without any money, right? So it's like you can look at, depending on which way you look, you're sitting here going like, well, we have more millionaires than ever. So in fact, that's kind of good because it means there's more people with money as opposed to just only a very few people with money, right? But then you can look at the other end and go, but the gap between them and the poorest people has gotten wider, right? And so everything's bifurcating. And so that's how the film world is too, where you look at feature films and they're larger than ever. It's the biggest budgets we've ever seen, $1 billion plus. But you also have no middle films. There's no middle range films. It's like indie films and massive budget films and nothing in between. No more is there a $50 million film or like, a $70 million comedies just don't like exist anymore. So,
So I also think like a big problem, not a problem, but since less people have been buying DVDs and Blu-rays,
right,
there's also a big chunk of movies that kind of lost their direct market.
Yes. Where does that put us? Like, where does that put us is, okay, well, we're not making big old feature length films, and we're going to do more than just a piece of art, right? Just one scene that loops, let's say. What's the market for that? And how does that become profitable or at least sustainable to do?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good point.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. I think a lot of it has to do with building your own customer direct distribution, however small that is, and then thinking evergreen, thinking somewhat long term, so that you can kind of give yourself a buffer to experiment with other markets. Because sometimes you might want to go the festival route to gain certain traction for a project or to connect with certain people to move your project further.
Right.
But sometimes you might want to say, I'm going to spend a year organizing private screenings in different countries. and then you market to venues that already attract an audience. And then you still have your film screened, but now you're more doing something physical with an audience directly. I think we need, for each project, we need to buffer in some time to experiment with what market models work for that specific film. And it's going to be less of a standard funnel of how the film industry expects you to work with your short film.
Right. Yeah, it's leaning into the strengths, right? Because
Yeah.
there's always like the Death Star and then the X-wing, right? And you can kind of be either one. And we're obviously more of the X-wing model. We're light, we're nimble, we can adapt quickly, but we just don't have that sheer force of a marketing pipeline that you can just put double the production cost in and make back your money, right? Like that's sort of a magic box machine that they've built over the last, almost 100 years now. And that seems to work pretty well for them. The issue with that obviously is it's slow. There's a lot of red tape, and there's the idea of doing something differently is just like why this works. Don't do that, right? And what you're saying is like you need to not just niche down into making your own unique small pipeline, but making a unique pipeline per project that hits differently. So, and doing a lot more sort of guerrilla marketing. It's something I've been trying to think about a lot. I'm really bad at doing. I'm really bad at sharing. And you know this, we've talked about this a little bit, which is like social media is so powerful. And we're just like, I want to work. I want to make things. I don't want to post and brag and talk about what I'm making, especially as like, I'm very hyper self-critical. And so everything I'm making, I'm like, that could be better. This is going to be a problem. Someone's going to find an issue with that or this other thing, but I do think it's really smart to lean into the strengths of indie filmmaking going, okay, we don't have this, this canon that we can just shoot this out of into the public, consciousness, but maybe what we can do is target a specific audience and try to build some more organic campaigns based off of like, if it's like, let's say it's a tech focused or whatever focused thing, like, okay, let's go to someplace where those people are and show this. Let's get this shown at like an NAB type deal. And if this is a, if you were to make a short film that's based around a certain game or certain, concept, it's like, okay, let's take it there and just go direct to consumer rather than kind of the shotgun approach of buying a billboard. And it's like, well, whoever sees it sees it. And hopefully some of them are within our demographic or, buying a ad space on a sports, station and being like, well, those guys are into sports, but maybe some of them are curious about Barbie. Like, who knows? Like, maybe we can get them to watch that. And so you end up having to be this mass appeal thing. And I'm someone that's a big fan of spiky stuff. And what I mean by that is like, you can be round and kind of safe. And everyone's like, I'm a whiskey guy, I drink whiskey. And people say, oh, that's smooth, right? That's typically what the average person wants out of an experience is they want like, or if they're driving a car, they want it to be like, oh, that's really comfortable and that's smooth. That just like, it just goes down easy. That's what I want. And I'm a fan of something going like, whoa, that's weird. That's interesting. Like, what would you do there? Like, wait. I never thought about that way. That any sort of that sort of thing I'm really into, but those are all risky and they're all spiky and they have a smaller audience because they're not mass market. But I think because of that, it gives you the freedom to not have to dumb down whatever it is you're doing or to like you don't have to appeal to mass market. Like you can live off of your some people think it's debunked, I don't know, but you can live off of your quote unquote 1,000 true fans, right? Like you can find this niche group that's a big fan of this one thing and they really can't get that anywhere else. And I think that market's opening up more and more because I'm not noticing Hollywood take more risks, right? Like it's like there's fewer risks being taken. And so I think
that's kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, no, go for it.
I was just gonna say, I think if you can find a market and there seems to be a lot of markets that just aren't being served right now, what they want, and if you can find a market like that, I think there's a good space for you to be. And I would encourage if you're making a show, like lean into that. Like if you're making something and there's a bit of like action and violence in it, like I would lean into that, like make that like 2 times more extreme. And that's what's so interesting is. I'm gonna make this one point, and then I want you to talk more because I don't want it to just be the Alex show. But what's really interesting is you look at like manga, and what they've done is only targeted hyper specific markets. Like
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you don't not only is this going to be about a shonen, it's going to be a shonen about dungeons. And like dungeons is a whole genre. And it's like, okay, this is a dungeon dating sim, and this is a dungeon whatever. And I think I will mention AI once here. And I think what we're going to see with AI is not a destruction of all the things that we love and know and blah, blah, blah. What we're going to start seeing is hyper specific. Like the very first thing you're going to see, by the way, just so you know, and this has already happened, I'm sure. I haven't looked, but I'm sure it has. The first thing you're going to see is porn of everything that you could ever want. It's like whatever the
No, of course.
whatever the thing is that you're interested in, that plus porn is going to be like a hashtag. Like you're going to find whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. Hello Kitty, cooking pie, whatever. It's whatever it is you like plus that. That's the first thing that's going to happen, which that always is the first thing that happens. After it gets through that like adolescent phase, right? Which is, by the way, all what you see already with AI. It's all like attractive women, right? It's like, okay, we got to get that out of our system. Once we get that out of our system, then we go on to be like, okay, what next, right? What else can we do with this technology? And it's like, okay, well, what you're going to start seeing is like essentially hyper-specific crossovers, right? It's going to be like, well, what if I could do, I've always liked this art style, and what if that could be in this type of thing, right? So it's like, I really love whatever it is, Wallace and Gromit, but what if it was an anime? What if it was like a manga, like really black and white, hard pencil, like high inking style? It's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then I think that's what you're going to start seeing very soon is like these hyper-specific niches of an interest or a topic or a genre and a style or a character or an archetype. And those are going to start like that's already kind of happened with like the indie art space, right? The indie art space is like obviously mostly porn and like furry commissions. And then outside of that, though, it's like these hyper specific little like characters and arcs that they're like making for these characters. And so that's where I see that going. But to kind of take a step back away from that, when it comes to short films specifically, where do they fit in between the size? Like this, there's the Hollywood size, right? Then there's like, how small can you go where you still can make a profit, but also not to be too big? Like mine right now is like a minute. It's really, 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 really short. And that's sort of the goal because short term, what we're hoping to do is get some clients from it, right? Like, so that's what we'd be making for clients is like a 1 minute long animation for a video game or for whatever. And then long term, right, the goal is to make it all direct to consumer. And those might be more long form.
In your format, you're first making essentially a really high polished case study without any client interference, without any meddling with the vision. And then in a way, you can immediately filter your next generation of clients that's coming in.
Yes.
Based on the quality output, on the thematics that you're talking about.
Right. It's also just proving we can do it. I've had the opportunity to kind of pitch on a few projects that we didn't get, and it's because we haven't ever done anything to that scale, and so we're going against sort of like a, in one case, literally a Digic. In other cases, like, smaller than Digic. And it's like, okay, we could probably win this bid, or we could at least be more seriously considered for this if we had a case study piece that like a little capstone to show, our capabilities and what we can handle as a fluid agency and stuff like that. There's a part of me that wonders, like, is it worth it to do a short film then, right? Like, because I could probably do all that stuff and just like not put the heavy effort into the polish and all the other work we're doing. And most YouTube content, it's like, if the goal is just to get views, on YouTube, then I'd be better off making like reaction videos and critique videos, right? So like in this economy where I think most people look at YouTube and the quality is really low and the quantity is really high, does it make sense to spend 2 years or whatever, 3 years developing a short film? And how do you view that like sort of dichotomy of like, well, should I just like put it out and as a rough animation and get the same amount of views I would if I put an extra 3 hours of work, or 3 months of work to make it like a nice render?
Interesting point. Okay. So from my personal perspective, I believe that making the art is very important, whether that's for personal reasons. It's like, okay, I have this vision in my head,
Right.
and in my head there's a helicopter flying over and there's this color smoke. I think that's just apocalypse now, but if
Yeah.
that's the vision, that's what we're trying to make.
Right.
And in the process, I feel like during the process is when you figure out what your market reacts to. So if you have a small community already at the beginning of your pre-production stage, you already have a way to test two like-minded people. What would you like? Would you
Hmm.
like merch? Would you like a physical event? Would you be interested in learning content? Are there assets from
Right.
what we've been sharing that you care about? That's a way to kind of get live feedback
Hmm.
on your project. I do believe it's important to make the projects as best as you can because of the evergreen value.
Hmm.
A lot of people would say short films don't have a long shelf life.
Hmm.
Once they're done and they're out of the festival circuit, that's the end of it. But maybe I would have to argue that most short films are not polished enough or are not a total vision of what they wanted to make. They're either rushed for deadlines or rushed for whatever reasons. If you're able to make a short film that stands on its own, I believe that 5 years from now, you'll still have an audience for it.
Right. I've noticed this on YouTube. I did some research. I've done a lot of research, but some of it, and there's this short film, and it's called like Mr. Fishy or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, but it has like millions and millions of views, like 24 million views or something like that. And it's just because they like, it's actually on the shelf, right? Like one of the problems I
Yeah.
think with the shelf life argument is like, well, have you actually kept it on the shelf, or did you do a whole marketing push and then you left and then no one can find it now because no one's talking about it and there's no place to watch it, right? So
Yeah.
there's a bunch of things I look at on YouTube, and it's like there's films from years and years ago that like not even production value wise aren't that great, but or just have just been dated maybe, right? Like and over the years they still get views because people still like see that video, or they can go viral multiple times, right? There's also short
Yeah.
stuff that like I wouldn't call it a short film necessarily, but that Corridor Digital, I would call it a short film. It's a short comedy of them abusing the robot, right, and the robot
Oh, yeah.
snapping and turning on them. That goes viral probably once every 8 months. Like it goes around us again, and it's just because it can. Like there's new people to discover that and go, oh my gosh, have you seen this thing? Or like we've
Yep.
and I think it probably goes viral shortly after Boston Dynamics makes a new announcement. Like every like there's like a new announcement from Boston Dynamics, and then that video makes the rounds again. And it's one of those things where like, does it have a short shelf life? Like you were pointing, you were kind of nodding along, like, or do you not give it the opportunity to have a longevity?
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people get discouraged. And on top of that, they might not have the right team on their side
Right.
who knows how to maneuver through marketing, distribution, building customer direct pipelines, maintaining the interest of your community. All that stuff has has positive ways you can do it. It has ways that are more effective. Um, so um, I guess a big problem I usually see in in the film market is people settle usually for the people they have in their closest circle around them to
Right.
work with them. And it's not a personal offense to any of those people if you were to choose to not work with them. But for some reason, whether it's ease or whatever, that usually becomes your team and your crew. But now, where is your marketer? Now,
Right.
where is who is going to set up your search engine optimization? So if you have someone who's a specialist at SEO, someone who can figure out the pipeline of your film from start to finish,
Right.
And then you and the creative team can focus on making the creative vision as best as possible so that the rest of your team have material to work with. Then it usually goes pretty well. And if it doesn't, it's time to A/B test. It's time
Right.
to test again, test. And maybe it's not a year. Maybe you just, like you said, you keep it on the shelf. And then every once in a while, you might gain some more views. You might do a new marketing push. If you're doing a physical circuit in the meantime, each one of those moments becomes a new opportunity for your project to flourish.
Right. I also think,
Yeah.
I think you said something a bit ago, and I think I might have kind of skipped over it, but I want to go back to it. And then I have another question after that about IPs and stuff. But you mentioned making a short film for the sake of making it is the right way to go. And I think, and not necessarily for the views or for the money. Like, and I think it's a really good point that I've been trying to tell people that I think we have a lot of things just backwards. There's a lot of things that we look at and like, I think we see all of time backwards. This is getting a little heady, but just bear with me. So we like to look from our perspective that way. And we go, oh, well, all these views meant that thing's good. And the answer is no. The thing was good, which got the views. Right? Like, like that's a big paradigm shift is like, no. You made something really great, and that great thing got the views. And so the goal of something isn't to get views. The goal is to be great, and the results are views. And not always, because markets, if you could predict it, then everything would be a success, right? But the same thing with like everything in our society right now is kind of this way. Like hospitals, they're like, well, the goal of hospitals is to make money. So we got to figure out how to make more money. It's like, no. Your goal is to make people well. Like your goal is to cure sicknesses and do really, really good medicine. And that results in profits. That results in these things. And so when I look at like Disney and other stuff, they're all looking at movies completely backwards. They look at the statistics and they look at the numbers and they go, how do we fit this film into those numbers? And it's like, no. The numbers are generated by the film being a film. Like this thing comes first, right? And it's the same thing with history as we go, well, all these things happened that led to us to here. And the answer is not at all. Like what's happening is something happens now, right now, this second. This is the only reality there is this very, very second, like thin, infinite line on the timeline. Everything that happens then is locked into place forever. That's how things actually work. How things actually work is right now happens, and that locks the past into place. But people like to think that the past is this trail. It's like looking at a rocket and then seeing the trail and going, well, of course it was going to end up here. Look at the trail. But the answer is no, because the trail isn't pushing the rocket, right? There's a fuel that's the right now moves,
Yeah, I see what
and then
you're
it
saying.
leaves a trail. Right, so we keep looking at the trail and going, oh, see, look, it's obvious. Like hindsight's 2020. This is where but at any moment this rocket could just explode. And if you're looking at the trail the whole time, you'd be like, and you skip this second, and you went, oh, it's going to be here, and like in another 3 seconds, it's going to be here. And the answer is no, it explodes here, and now that trail ends. And so like that's reality. Reality is something's moving and it leaves a trail. Right, so the movie's good, it's successful, and it makes money, or it gets views. And then what we like to do is look at the views and you go, well, that made it successful. It's like, no, you have it backwards. Like, right? Like, so the point of making a good film and a good short film or any art isn't that I'm making it to get the views. I'm making it to get these things. I'm making it to make it, right? I'm making it because it needs to exist, because it's calling to me to be made. And then I'm inherently taking on risk whenever you do anything. It's a myth that you're not always at risk, but we like to pretend we're not. And so I'm going to take on a bunch of risk. I'm going to make this thing, but by making it, and by making it good, by putting in, like you said, the production value and the quality and making it the best it can be, that's what leads to the success, right? Everything else is kind of an accident, like hitting a target market, doing all these other things. You could do like you don't think every single film plans out its marketing beforehand. Like every single film is like, oh, okay, here's our demographics and here's what the demographics tend to like. And then we're going to, like, they all do that. And like, not every film's a success, right? A lot of them are flops. Yeah. And so, the best thing you can do, like you said, is make something make it as good as you can, and then experiment. A/B test. Okay, what worked? What didn't work? Right? Let's learn from that, and then let's make something else. Right? And that's another point where I think we can be a lot more. We can utilize our agility, right, to our advantage in this sense, which is like A/B testing for Hollywood costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. Like A/B testing for us is like almost free. Like if we want to change a thumbnail on a YouTube video, which I've done many times, just to see, is this going to work better? Is it going to get more clicks? I just sit down for 30 minutes, make a new thumbnail, try that out. For Hollywood, it's like, well, we got to call the designer, we got to contact the agency about the rights. Can we show the character from this angle? Can we have the logo be this size? And can we get Karen on the phone and ask her if their department can take a look at this and give it an approval? She's out of town this week. So the A/B test is just like, that's a lot of work just for like posters, just for that stuff is slow and takes a lot of work versus for, and then for like content itself, it's like that feedback loop is so long. That it's really hard to know. So I did want to touch back on that because that was a really good point you made about if you're creating something, you should be creating it to create it, right? Like,
thank you, man. I really think it's true because if you're making an art piece, I would say the core idea is just some personal expression you have, some deep core feeling of maybe, oh, this would be cool, or this would be very important, or anything in between. I feel like that, even if it doesn't reach the audience that it deserves, that is the purest form of the project that you'd like to make.
Yeah.
And even if it's a limited group of people who sees it, it will probably resonate deeper.
Right.
And from there, now, if we do want to play the marketing game, if you have a core group of people with who your project resonated deeply, you can use that power to spread through word of mouth, technically through testimonials,
right?
But from your audience.
Well, and that's a good point too, because what you're testing for, to me, is like I have an intuition. And my intuition says this is a really cool idea or would be fun to do. And then I give it to an audience. And then if it's not hitting what the problem isn't that I didn't make the right content for the right audience usually. I think what the real problem is most of the time is, I didn't actually capture that feeling that I thought was really cool well enough. It's almost like trying to articulate something. And you're like, no, you misunderstood. No, I articulated that all wrong. Which happens a lot with artists, right? There's a lot of times where you're trying to make something and somebody looks at it and goes, wait, are you saying that like this? And you're like, oh no, I see how you got that. That's not what I was going for. And so you're like, okay, well then I need to polish this so I can articulate it correctly.
I feel like there is a bit of a vocabulary issue that a lot of artists have between connecting what they think, what they have in their head, and then step one is how do you communicate that to your team?
Right.
And then step two, how do you get all of that stuff, in this case in movies, on the screen to be communicated to the people?
Right.
There's like 2, 3, or even more layers of complexity there.
Well, and the painful part is you can't do it too literally, otherwise it falls apart too. Like they have to have that same, what you're trying to give your audience is the same aha moment that you had when you thought of the cool thing. So it's like, how do I get them to have that? That's the hardest part. If you just like show it super obviously, right? Like it just becomes like trite. And you're like, okay, this is just on and then your audience can see where it's gonna go. And then there's no like moment of revelation. But if you're too esoteric about it and too artsy about it, then it's just like, there's no way I was ever going to guess that interpretation. And you might as well have just made like a Jackson Pollock painting, right? Like if I'm going to try to figure out what this means off of random dots on a board, but then there's this moment where it's really, really cool where you can do it just right. And you get this fun aha moment. And that's my favorite modern art. Like a lot of modern art's frankly just crap. And then there's some cool modern art where they have this aha moment and you're like, oh, that's really neat. And then there's a third type, which is just impressive because of the scale or like the materials they're using. But one of them was this person had painted like a seashore type, like a bunch of people at the beach, right? Type of a thing. But they just use like a bunch of little specks. Like there's a bunch of little dots all over the place and then like a general shape of like the ocean. But then if you shine into light from the side, all those dots that just look like dots create shadows. And all of a sudden your brain interprets them all as people on the beach because the sun's setting. And it was a really cool like, oh, aha. But if you just painted a bunch of shadows on a beach, it'd be like an okay painting of a beach with a bunch of shadows on it, a bunch of people standing at sunset. But the fact that it took like a light and it was a physical thing, you had this aha moment where you at first you're looking at like, what is this? And then you get the light at the right angle and you're like, oh, that's actually really cool. That moment is the goal. And like usually it's like communicating that after, like you were saying, like all this other stuff is pretty difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, in the variety of short films we've either been developing or have made, I've always had this struggle with every project. Because when I come up with a science fiction film, once I start researching about what I want to do, I realize I don't know as much about sci-fi as I thought I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go down the rabbit hole of you have to read up more, you have to find more context to what you're making. And then it's about finding the vocabulary because your team has no idea either.
Right.
So for I guess a good example would be this is horror, it's an erotic slasher film we're planning to shoot next year. It's called Bloodbath Azure. I had an idea of combining the high blood pressure emotions of erotic scenes with, and then like converting that emotion in the scene into scary stuff.
Right.
In my brain, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of know how I would structure the scene and edit to make that flow. But my team at that point didn't have enough experience watching horror movies.
Right.
So what I was referencing didn't quite click.
Right.
So it took
just show
me
them like any Japanese, like they're the kings of that specific genre of like,
True.
oh, this is kind of sexy, but now it's uncomfortable, and now I don't know if I like that. Like it's a very
yes,
they're very good.
But
at
how do you like
line.
Communicate exactly that, right? Because then, sure, if you communicate to the cinematographer, you might say it's about the length of shots.
Right.
It's about how certain characters are framed a little bit, like their forehead is chopped up uncomfortably. Like, okay, fair. But then you move down to your costume design department. It's like, okay, is it fuzzy materials against hard backgrounds?
Yeah.
Is it glossy skin tight materials when someone is running? Like, what is it that makes the full image, the total image you're looking at, do what you want it to do?
There's a concept, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this concept, and none of them get it. So I think you'll get this, and I'm excited because you'll be the first one to be like, yeah, exactly. English is an awesome language because it's so simple, and so you can learn like a handful of words and communicate with almost anyone, which makes it awesome. It's a really sucky language because it's so simple. So a good example is love, right? We have the word love, and that's a great word. However, like I obviously don't mean the same thing when I say I love my wife, I love pizza, I love my car, and I love taking naps. Those are all completely different loves, in very, very different ways, right? Even just I love my wife and I love my son. Those are completely different loves, right? And so, but we just have one word for all of them. And, we have this one word, nostalgia, and we have another word like whatever. So there's a word that I want to have in vocabulary, and I haven't come up with what it should be. And like German's much better at this with like Schadenfreude or whatever it's called, which is like, when you're on the stairs and you remember the perfect line that you could have said. And it's like, oh, that would have been great. We don't have a word for that, right? So the feeling is when you're a little kid and you stumble upon the first dead baby bird you've ever seen, and there's like maggots eating it. It's not disgust. You're curious. There's a morbid curiosity. But it's also this thing that's removing your innocence. And you're like, oh, there's something wrong about this. I shouldn't necessarily be seeing this, but I'm compelled to keep watching, and I'm revolted, but also interested. And
Yeah.
like the best we have is morbid curiosity, but that's not quite it. It's like there needs to be, and this is like what a lot of cosmic horror I think is getting at, is that feeling of like, this is really uncomfy. It's not good, but I need to know I'm learning something here that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't seen this, right? And I think a lot of times your first experiences with the adult sexual world as a child are this way as well, as or a young adult, as you're starting to go through teens, you're starting to see things and you're like, this is, I don't know if I should be seeing this. I don't know if I don't, a good one is like, I don't know if I should be attracted to this. That's another thing. This is kind of attracting me. I don't like that it's attracting me. I don't want, but there's something inherently there that I can't look away. And it's a very complex emotion that I think is really hard to communicate. And so I wish we had a word, and then you could take that word and take it to your crew and go like, okay, it's this is what I'm trying to distill it down into. It's this concept of seeing something that is enticing or engaging or I want to keep watching it, but also I'm very uncomfortable with the fact that I like this, and I don't know what it is that I need to be gaining from this, whether it's the knowledge of death and decay and innocence lost or whatever. So I don't know. Do you resonate with that? Like, that's a concept I've been trying to get people to understand, and I don't know if everyone's experienced it. Like, I as a kid definitely experienced that, looking at exactly what I'm talking about.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think maybe not all kids are that emotionally in tune with the moment.
Right.
Because I remember similar situations in my past, and I don't know if I'm imagining this, but I have a feeling as if the weather was never great when I would encounter one of those things.
Yeah.
I have a feeling as if my body was a bit tense and like I wanted to leave the situation, but I was also letting it continue until the limit.
Right. Yeah. That's yes. It's exactly that.
Right.
Exactly that. It's like, I need to get out of here. I can't stay here. But how long can I stay here? And a good example for me is the first time I saw Akira, the film. It was like that feeling over and over again. But especially in the body horror phase at the very end, when Tetsuo is morphing and he's slowly encompassing everything
Yep.
I was like, this is gross. I can't watch this, but I can't look away. Right. And I'm like, it's something that shatters your previous, like I said, kind of your innocence in a way. It's like, oh, here's my bubble. Here's what exists in the world. And then you find out there's something more that exists. And I think it's, like I said, it's that cosmic horror idea of like, there's something much deeper, weirder, different than I thought the world was about. And I need to know it. I need to know what this thing is because it's educational or it's tantalizing, whatever. But it's also, like you said, I can't stay here, but I want to stay as long as I can before I go, okay, that's too much, right? Like it's like this dark abyss sucking you in, but then you also don't want to but there's knowledge there. You can't look away.
But weirdly enough, I feel like that moment then becomes an imprint in your brain.
Right.
And then that feeling, you recall that and you keep reflecting on it. And maybe it gets worse and more surreal as the years go by.
Yeah, for sure. So we both had this idea, and it's interesting to me that this is propagating naturally. We both had this idea about IPs and about the idea of an open source IP. And this is really interesting to me because it's something that I thought maybe I was the first person to ever think of it. I was like, surely someone's thought of this. So I want to hear what your vision for like an open source IP is, because it's something also kind of like the Sony camera thing where I'm like, I think it's the right time for this. Like, I think I'm early, but I don't think I'm the only one. And I think there's people that are trying to do it in different ways via like blockchain and stuff like that, but I think it doesn't need to be that complicated. So I'm curious about, like, you mentioned on your website that you want to develop an open source IP, and I want to hear more about what you think that would look like.
Yeah. So I do believe that if you have at least some open source component to any type of IP, that you can really speed up the collective growth of the art community.
Yeah.
I'd say. So we've kind of been experimenting here and there with what can we make open source based on what we know from how this IP stuff works in the
Right.
bigger scheme of things. We have basically started with making production development basically public as we develop the film.
Right.
So from script writing, we would have a link available to the script. And then from pre-production, we would we would put an effort into making everything publicly available as we develop the film. This means the assets, the research, the whatever we would
Right.
find. One of the things that we found in this model is that the people who learn from you can give you feedback, which, especially in a technical sense of things, it can really benefit the production. We would be showing something of, look, we have this problem. And then someone would be like, oh, yeah, I've had that problem 5 times in a previous project. This is how you can solve it. That was a big benefit we saw in being more open in communication. However, one thing that I've for a long time been struggling with to figure out how it would best work is to have the entire IP open source.
Right.
So you can actually, I guess, make changes to the story, make changes, play with these characters and these components of the world.
Yep.
Make them your own. Because in a way, I feel like fanfic is already doing that.
Right.
And I have a feeling as if it doesn't really affect whatever your core project is that you're making.
Right.
If I'm making Syntactic Labyrinths, the space film, and this story is A to B, and here is an open source description of the world building with all the components and characters inside, the story that I make probably is still gonna generate most first audience.
Right.
Primary audience. It's probably gonna generate most money over the other versions that get made of it, at least initially. So I don't really see the big problem, I think.
Yeah, I think you are nailing it. I think there's a few case studies that I think prove this to be the case. The first and foremost is obviously Star Wars. Star Wars is the ultimate case study for any of this stuff. Like Star Wars comes out, 4, 5, and 6, they do great, but really where it gets its legs is the fans and the costumes and dressing up and making your own little lore and stuff like that. And then that carries it to 1, 2, and 3, and those all do good, right? But like they're not critically acclaimed films or anything like that. But then you get this from 2000, probably 2000 through now, there's this huge underground movement of fan films. There are whole websites dedicated to just Star Wars fan projects. On YouTube right now, if you just search Star Wars fan film, there's like millions of them. None of those are costing Disney a penny. They're not taking audience away from something else they would be watching. This is the mistake, is this idea that if someone goes and watches a YouTube fan film, they don't want to engage with your other content. That's not true. Like, people want more of what they like. They don't go, oh, I got enough. This is all good.
True.
Right? Nobody goes like, well, I had 1 cup of coffee over there, so I don't need to get coffee anymore. It's like, no, you're addicted now and you want more coffee, right? So you're going to go someplace else and get some coffee. And so the idea that, if I let people use the IP, and in fact, it's the opposite, right? Like, you've just gained audience you wouldn't have had because now that person is a node that connects back to your main hub. And that node is in a place that you wouldn't have had it, especially if they do something weird. Like, the weirder things is kind of the best thing for your IP. So when someone does Star Wars My Little Pony crossover and you go, oh, I don't want my IP associated with that thing, shut it down. What you're actually doing is you're tapping into an audience you wouldn't have had because they're not the same audience as your core audience, right? So that's, I think all good. And then people ask about like brand dilution, right? Like, well, what about the brand getting diluted? And there's plenty of ways to cover this. First off, it's an overstated fear. So people talk about like, I think IP law should be abolished. I think we should get rid of all that. The idea that you can own an idea, you can own a color, you can own a sound or a series of sounds or a series of colors is stupid.
Yeah.
And I just think it's asinine that we let corporations go, well, bum, 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 that's mine. I own that. You're like, you didn't invent that. You were just the first asshole to copyright it. Like this idea that like chocolate chip cookies are copyrighted, right? That somebody owns that patent on chocolate chip. It's like,
No, they do.
screw you. You didn't invent chocolate chip cookies. You were just the first jerk to be like, I'm going to legalize this and none of you can make it now. Like,
Yeah.
you know, or you know what I mean? Like, so like it's all garbage. That being said, even in a world where that exists, it's far overrated. So Kleenex has lost their patent on Kleenex because it became everyone uses it for any sort of moisturized handkerchief. Guess what? You've never gone to the store and bought a wrong Kleenex box. You've never gone to the store and bought something thinking it was Kleenex. And it doesn't benefit that other brands to pretend to be you, because do you know what happens? They pretend to be you. They just add to your market share, right?
Yep.
Now, maybe someone pretends to be you and they poison their food and it kills a bunch of people or something like that, right? I think it's usually pretty quick that it gets out there that was some other jerk pretending to be this person. Like when I go to the Philippines and I see Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck on the side of a barbershop, I don't go, oh, this is a Disney barbershop. Nobody does that, right? And yet that's exactly what like those laws are supposed to stop from happening, right? So that's the other problem. So it's overstated. As far as the concern, I think I have a 3-tiered structure that fixes this. Star Wars used this structure. Warhammer uses this structure. And I think you could use this structure too. Warhammer's probably, I think right now, the best local case study of something that's just absolutely exploded with fan projects and fan art and memes and allowing, and now even like kind of, they're fighting against 3D printing. And I think they should kind of embrace it, frankly. But, that whole thing is another thing that like, and then you see this backlash when they like buy a Stardaze, right? They buy like this amazing guy who's making amazing stuff. Like, we're going to bring him in-house. We're going to cease and desist. And it's like, now the thing's kind of like dead probably, right? Who knows? And so, you know, let that be. If he's doing fine on his own, like, it's not like hurting you. More people are a fan now. Like, I've bought 4 or 5 Warhammer books now because of a Stardaze. That's what really got me like into it. Right, like I kind of knew about it before. I already liked it, and then that came out. I was like, "Oh, this," because I didn't want to play the board game, and I was, "Oh, there's a whole like storytelling lore aspect to this thing that I never really knew about." Right. So how you do it is you have 3 tiers, right, and you have, and steal this template, by the way. You have canon, right? You have the actual stories that have a stamp on it from the official narrative people. Then you have, and that's actually, I think what you would do is you probably maintain ownership of the IP, right? You'd have an IP, but you just say like, it's open. I'm never going to sue anybody, whatever. Then you have what I would call rumors, right? So you have this whole, it's like, it's lore essentially, right? It's like, did this happen? Did this not happen? Who knows, right? Did this character end up here and like make out with that character? They might have, they might not have. It's not canon, but it's in the lore. And at any moment you can choose to like pull that in, right? You can promote it. If someone makes like a really awesome thing, what I think you should do is, unlike Warhammer did, where it's like, we're going to hire you, we're going to bring you in-house. I think you just give them like a stamp. Like, you're just like, you are now, you now get a canon stamp. And now, and eventually, like, if they keep doing it, you're like, okay, you're now official lore master. Like, you now get to contribute because you understand, right? They've proven that they understand what the IP is about and what the nature is. So they're not going to do something crazy, you know, super fan fiction-y, right? Where you're like, that's cringe. That's not part of my lore. I don't want that to be at all the case. So you have rumors, and then what you have is wild space. And wild space is where like anything can happen, right? That's where, and like Star Wars does this really great. I don't think I have it behind me. Shoot. There's an amazing comics. It's collected in a omnibus. So, and there's a bunch of them. Some of them are about bounty, like they have usually a theme, like bounty hunters and rogues, or like Jedi, the Old Republic. And I highly recommend them for anybody, but they have some of the best stories. And some of them are cringy, some of them are weird, right? There's like a bunch of like random Jar Jar Binks jokes and stuff like that. But that only existed because we just let people make stuff. And it was like, yeah, this doesn't have to be canon. This is wild space. You can do whatever you want. It's all lore. And that's the right format, I think. I think you have the 3 tiers: wild space, lore, fan fiction. Do whatever you want. You can make the characters whatever, gender bend them, do whatever you want. I don't care. Then there's the second tier, which is like, this is people that are taking it a little more seriously. That we want to say, like, this is like an official rumor, right? And then there's like canon. There's a canon stamp that you can stamp on whatever you want. And
I think that's a very good model.
Yeah, I think that's the model to follow.
Yeah, that's very good. Because, of course, it's specifically, we're talking here about narrative, world building, IP.
Right.
Rather than, for example, more documentary leaning films or complete abstract short films.
Right.
I'm sure there's always a way to wrap an IP around everything,
Yeah.
But specifically for world building short films, I think it's drastically over feared what an audience can do with your IP.
Yes.
Especially
just films in general.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because especially the people who see your film in the beginning, the ones who are going to be that invested, they care.
Yeah, they're going to try to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
absolutely.
It really bothers me that there's no Inception universe to play in, right? You have the movie Inception.
Yeah,
right?
no.
And it's a really cool concept in a universe, and then no one else has been allowed to play in that universe. And there's so many people that I think would do fun little, because a lot of people are not good at coming up with like the big idea. A lot of people aren't good at coming up with like Star Wars. Like, that's just so abstract to them. But they're really good at these little narratives, and they have like a cool, like that little farmer, that little idea of like, there's a farmer and he's hunting someone down and everyone treats him differently because he has this essentially a sheriff's badge on. So everyone thinks he's a sheriff, everyone thinks he's like a badass, but really he's just some dude. That's a cool story, but that existing within the Star Wars, there's a very different mindset to make a story like that versus what Lucas is making. And it's a very different story to have a fun, you can have so many fun Inception stories about going into someone's dream and then the dream within a dream, and you could have somebody exploring, anything. They could be trying to figure out, maybe they're trying to make someone fall in love with them. And as they go deeper and deeper into the dream to plant this thing, they just get rejected over and over again. Right. And it's more of this romantic comedy almost, or of this guy who's trying to dive deeper and deeper into this woman's dreams, and she keeps getting more crazier and Freudian or whatever. And you can have a lot of fun with that. And I'm a big fan of Jung, Carl Jung, and his concepts around dreams. And like, there's all sorts of weird stuff you could do, in that world. And because it's closed off, it's like you only get one story, and, that might not be the only story to tell. And now, if anyone, and here's the other sucky part, right? You get caught in this catch-22. So when it comes to something like Sherlock Holmes, right, and you make the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes, well, I know a lot of people that were mad about that. And they're like, that's not Sherlock. That's like some action flick dude, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, let's say he didn't call it Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Let's say he called it, Detective Boyle and, Dotson. Everyone would go, well, that's just Sherlock Holmes, obviously. Right? Like, so you're kind of stuck where it's like, well, if I try to do it with my own spin, you guys get mad and say, oh, that's not the thing. I don't like that being the official canon of Sherlock. And I also don't like, but if you don't do it, I'm just going to call it out as a copycat, right? It's like, so I would like to remove that stigma for people and be like, make a copycat, make a thing in this world that you think is cool, and just do it in a unique enough way that it's interesting and different, which is more or less what we're doing with our first film. Like, our first film is very, very heavily Dead Space. And originally it started as just a Dead Space short film. It just started as literally, what if we just made a Dead Space thing, a title sequence for Dead Space. And then from there, it turned into its own thing. And then to avoid legal properties, and because we're not using any characters, music, designs, etc., from the actual Dead Space IP, I was like, well, screw it. And we came up with our own soundtrack. And so it's like, let's just make our own thing and not rely on them, right? But like, it's close enough that if you look at it, you're going to be like, well, that's just Dead Space, right? Well, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, So I think even when it comes to a short film that doesn't have a whole IP around it, like, if someone just wants to do, like, if you made something that's very close to Looper right now, Someone's like, oh, that's just Looper. It's like, it would be really nice if I could just say like, yeah, it's a Looper spinoff. It's a Looper side thing. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
And being able to open it up for people, you know, to play with in that way, I think would be really cool. Or even like, what's the Bullet Train one where it's going through the ice, Polar or something or other? Snowpiercer. I want like 4 or 5 Snowpiercer stories, right? I want like spin-offs. Like, why not? Let them do it. Just if they want to do something on a train, it doesn't have to be like, oh, that's Snowpiercer. It's like, okay, cool. I'll put a little. And then what's really cool is it's mutual, right? Like, they get this cool. The whole reason for wanting to do it kind of as a Dead Space, I still am tempted to call it the Dead Space short film, just because I like tapping into that audience, because I know they're gonna like it. I'm like, if you like that, you're gonna like this, and then we help each other, right? This doesn't hurt. It's not, again, they're not no longer interested in Dead Space because they saw another piece of Dead Space content. They're more likely to buy it, right? So, anyway, so
I think,
do you see that as I still see that as the same model, but you see it as a different model, or do you think it's, you know, if you're going to do just opening it up so people have access to the tools and to the different
what I've
parts of
been
the
noticing is that all that you're describing is what I wish to, what I'm aiming towards. I'm aiming towards making that model available.
Right.
But I've come to realize that the legal side around it needs to be pretty strong. You need to build your own IP contracts that have all of your open source, almost like a Creative Commons license,
Right.
where you say specifically that you are not going to sue them and that you do appreciate this and that there are some boundaries.
Right.
And those boundaries ideally are narrative boundaries to what your specific thing is.
Here's the other really, really good one, I think, is Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Here's the rule book. We're going to establish this as the rule book, but you can tell whatever stories you want within this rule book, and your stories can be crazy and they can be wild.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that from a contract and legal standpoint, we'll have to take more inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, not the bad stuff where they're now trying to like sue DMs and stuff like that. Custom,
Oh
you make
my
a custom
God.
campaign. I saw that they're trying to like, if you published a custom campaign, they were supposed to get a cut and you had to pay them, and it was a whole thing.
I see. I think I did read some headline of that.
Yeah, it's really awful. That's the stupidest thing ever. It's so dumb. Warhammer's the same way. If you're someone from Warhammer watches, I'm sure if you're a lower down person, you agree. But like, stop kiboshing people making short films. Stop trying to like, just let them go. They're only helping you. It's free publicity, and you didn't pay to have it made. That's the best part.
Yep.
Like, that's what's so funny.
What I do think could be a nice bridge between the short filmmakers and the IP owners is a way to accept unsolicited commissions. So that if, for example, if you had a way to reach out to the team at Dead Space and you were like, hey, listen, I have this cool project and we have a cool team, and ABC, look at this little teaser that we've done. If there's a formalized way for them to just see that and be like, wow, that's actually super cool. Maybe we can help you guys out with either the marketing push that you need or with blah, 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 because then they would see the mutual value.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think more people should build in what's sort of what you saw happening. You saw this with brands, the brands that have embraced like influencer marketing versus the ones that haven't, have obviously, they're now the new successful brands, and the other ones are left in the dust. And so you saw that happening where they developed a influencer like onboarding process, right? And then they were able to develop like, okay, what do we expect CPM? What do we blah, 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 blah. And that became way easier by having that door open essentially, or just the door there to be knocked on. And that's a really good point. The only thing I fear, and I'm not really too afeared of this, because I also only see it as sort of like good, is I agree with you. I think you need some sort of Creative Commons, some sort of custom license that stops anyone over a certain size from taking the IP. So there's a small part of me that's like, screw it. If Disney wants to make it, the worry for me is that Disney makes it and then somehow is able to cut out everybody, right? Is able to like copyright it themselves. And what's nice is if you have something like, there's certain things that like they haven't been able to copyright, like Snow White or and Winnie the Pooh, they lost the copyright on, right? So now you can make Winnie the Pooh whatever. And nobody's confusing that little Winnie the Pooh horror movie with the actual Winnie the Pooh. No one's like, oh, Disney made a horror movie about Winnie the Pooh. If you are, you're an idiot, and who cares about you anyway? You're not a customer they want or I want. But that is the one thing I do still think about is like, okay, how would you write that in such a way where it can be open and free? And I'm sure what I would want to do is talk to a lot of tech companies and stuff and see like what they're doing. Like, how have you guys stopped this from happening? How have you stopped, how's open whatever it is stop someone from coming in and taking it over? Or maybe that's just like a real threat that happens sometimes. Look at Linux and Ubuntu and be like, okay, you guys are the bassist for so many other people's hardware that is copywritten. Like, so how do you, I guess they have to make a branch or something. So yeah, that'd be the other thing to kind of look at.
Yeah, that's kind of why recently I've decided to get more in contact with lawyers.
Yeah.
And recently I got in contact with an IP lawyer who has quite a bit of experience within video games and some artistic art market projects.
Mm-hmm.
And there's quite a big overlap between, for example, a painting, which is just an appreciating asset, and your bundle of ideas for your short film.
Mm-hmm.
You can technically replicate a painting. You can technically, in some cases, even just sell prints of another painting. But with a lot of the bigger paintings that are owned by museums, you cannot do that.
Right.
So it's somewhere in the middle. There is the fine line, the detail that you need to put in the contract, and then you're good. And if you don't have that, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about video games, and this is another good place to go, and then we'll wrap up because we're getting a little long here, but the is mods. Like, I grew up as a modder, and I loved modding, and I loved the modding community, and forever and ever and ever, mods were just like, go for it. Who the heck cares? Like, yeah, we made a cool video game, just go do whatever, right? Half-Life. And then those have spawned like many full studios and many full games, Turtle Rock Studio, coming from CS:GO, and pretty much all the games that spawned off of Half-Life, right? You have, you have CS:GO, you have Team Fortress, you have Left 4 Dead, right? And these are all ultimately owe themselves back to the Source Engine 1, right? And that just being like, yeah, go for it, do whatever you want. Yeah. And it's really weird to me how almost no games now, like, it was like back in the early mid-thousands, every game was modded, right? And the famous obviously is Skyrim, right? Like, it's like all the mods and mods. And then like they tried monetizing it, they tried figuring out, and I'm like, no, that's not what this is about, right? And right now they're trying it with Fortnite. I'm curious to see how that goes. Where they're
gonna try with the Sims.
Yeah,
that's gonna be
about
interesting
that too, because I gotta believe part of Skyrim being the top purchase game of all time, right, is like the mods, right? I gotta believe a portion of CS:GO and these games being, even like they didn't even exist without. That's not even a portion of these games didn't exist without modding, right? They started as a mod. Dota started as a mod, right? So it's like I look at that and I go, okay, why have we suddenly stopped letting that happen? That's sort of the community I'm looking to create, right? I think that's what you want is like modders, like people to take this thing. We've built them. We've done the heavy lifting, okay? Like we built the core thing. We built the rule set. We built all the basic stuff or just a cool concept that you could explore, right? That's a hard thing to do. And now like spin-offs are easier, but they're also really interesting. It's like stuff I just don't have time or the interest to do. Like I would never think to turn, and neither did any of the devs, right, at StarCraft or Warcraft, right? Was like, well, let's make this like a hero battler. Like no one thought to do that, to make like a Dota. And then somebody did. Someone whose passion was in, more competitive combat did that. And same thing with like CS:GO. It's like, well, we're here making an alien shooter. And someone's like, well, I'm really into terrorist and anti-terrorist stuff, so I'm gonna make that. And you're like, well, that's cool. I'm not interested in that, but the fact that you are interested in that and you brought it forth, like using my thing, I'm not mad at it. Like, you know.
Absolutely. I feel like I've noticed a lot of the positive things, especially within the Blauw Films projects with the sharing of our assets. I remember this one time where, so we had a Planet Earth file and there was a moon asset in the Planet Earth file. And then one of the people in the communities reached out to me. It was like, "Hey, it would be cool if the water level of the water texture map, the alpha range, was linked to the distance that the moon has to the planet." I was like, "Wow, that sounds great." But one, I didn't have time to do it.
Right.
Two, I just like it wasn't necessary for the project that we were building.
Right.
So it was like, great idea, thanks, but whatever. But then a week later, he had done it.
Yeah.
And he sent me the file. And he was like, look, I need it for my thing. Just make this public for the rest.
Yeah.
I was like, I see. And now I'm seeing the value of this.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's exactly it. That's so cool. That's such a cool story to have. And I hope, we both get more of those stories. Because I think, we live in this sort of cyberpunk world, and we've gotten away from, like, everything's corpo, right? And everything's like all this stuff. And I really feel deeply this desire to, like, can we make something to make it? Can we make something to collaborate? Can we just share stuff? Can we just get back to humanity and being, like, just open with each other and, like, oh yeah, you need to use some of that. Do you need 2 eggs? Like, if my neighbor comes and calls me and goes, hey, I would go as a kid all the time to my neighbor's house. Hey, my mom ran out of eggs. Can we get some eggs? And they'd be like, yeah, here's 2 eggs. And, nobody thought of Venmoing or IOU or whatever, It was just like, yeah, you need eggs, I have eggs. It's cool. Let's share that, And, someone's like, oh, cool, you made a moon thing. It'd be cool if this happened. And you're like, I don't have time for that. I'm like, oh, I'll do it. And they're like, yeah, take it, right? And I get it. I get, like, people, if someone comes to your house every single day asking for eggs, you can't, like, you got to cut them off at some point. But that's what being human is, is just helping each other out. And it's like, how can we get by in this, like, crazy, corporal world? And it's like, well, maybe we can, like, develop our own things. Like, it's like, if I'm not seeing what I want in the mainstream, like, maybe I'll make it. And making it super hard. So maybe I'll find someone else that already put in that hard work, and, like, I'll hop on and, like, just help it out. And so that's awesome.
I think it's important for people to know that their ideas might be extremely ambitious, extremely complicated, and that the people around them might not exactly be the help they need for this specific idea. But it's worth it to still strive for it and try to find the people. Whether that's in your local communities, or you have to travel a little bit, or I've heard the argument many times, there is no film community in my country, or there's no film community in my neighborhood or anywhere. It's like, yeah, that's fair. I understand. Like, it's going to be more difficult for you.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. You're going to have to, like, learn a few other things. You might have to figure out how to be good at blogging.
Yeah.
So that you can attract people through the internet.
Yep.
Or you might want to look at the history of your country, see who did successfully make it in the industry there.
Right.
See if they're still alive. Try to see if you can reach out to them. It's about being quick on your feet. I feel, like you said, there's the Death Star over there, and then there's the X-Wings here.
Right.
If we're X-Wings, like, make use of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't try to copy the Death Star. I think I see so many people, and I fall for this all the time. Like, it was really ironic. I saw this, like, YouTube stream, and it had 14 views, and it was a subathon, right? Like, I'm going to try to get all these people a subathon. I'm going to stream for, like, 24 hours, and some girl, and, like, everything about it was like, oh, you don't know why you're doing this. Like, you're doing it because that's what all the big channels do. But it's not going to work for you because you're a small independent streamer that no one's seen before. So running a 24-hour live stream subathon of you just like talking to the camera in a ball pit or something like that isn't going to do it. Like, you have to find your thing, and it's not going to be what the big guys are doing. Like, that's the benefit too. That's what's cool, is like they have they have blinders on to all these other opportunities that you get to play with, and most of them aren't going to work. Like, you're going to get to experiment with 4 or 5 of them. Like I talked about my first company with the GIF idea failed horribly, and then the company I'm working on, that I have now is okay, but it could be better. And then I'm going to do this short film, and like, I don't know, like we'll see. Like maybe it'll do good. Like, but you got to try, right? You got to try, and that's the benefit, is you can try with slightly less risk, with slightly less people reliant on you to eat and to sleep and stuff like that. So use it to your advantage.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good note to wrap up on, man. It's been a great conversation.
Man, it's been great.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This has been so invigorating. I feel like I really hope a lot of people can see this, not because I want the views or anything, but because I want like that feeling that I have right now of like, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to win. Like, we're the Rebel Alliance. We're going to beat the Death Star. Like, I want that feeling for other people to feel that, and for them to develop their own like IP and everything.
I agree.
I'm going to stop recording, but
cool. Wait, one more thing.
Oh, one more thing.
Would you like to do another one of these at some points where we speak more about monetization of short films and the distribution part?
100%. 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Because now we've kind of gotten people to the emotional level of, okay, I can do this. I should do this. But then, once you start hitting too many walls in the practical side, people get discouraged too easily, and then back to square one.
Yeah, I'm working on a solution to that. My biggest problem is I'm working on way too many things, but I think that's where the community building aspect becomes really, really important. I think getting people to talk to each other and giving them a place to meet like-minded people, and like you were saying, like collaborate outside of their local zone, get solutions to problems they don't currently have or that they're running into that someone else has already solved, et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of that, there's this cool magic thing that can happen where you can kind of build a self-sustaining community where everyone's providing something that everyone else needs, right? And that's able to become sustainable. And so that's something that I find really interesting too when you look at small towns. Like, I'm really curious. It's really interesting to me that a small town can work. So it's like, wait, you're just all paying each other, right? But it's like, well, we all need different things at different times. And so it's like, okay, so that's how that works. And so,
yes,
there is a certain sense where that can eventually happen. And we should talk about, like, I don't mean Patreon, but patrons, right? And then investors, the difference between those two. And then also, like you were saying, like the marketing and different ways to monetize, whether you monetize while building or after it's built or whatever. So I think that's definitely better for another time, but I really want to, I really want to have that conversation as well. I think that'd be really
Hell yeah, man. Sounds good. Sounds great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much for having me.
And online, man. It'll be a lot of fun.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right. Peace.
Cheers, man.